Lions don't roar before they strike. The most powerful don't need to speak to inspire fear. Some try to dominate with noise and threats, loud emotions. But true power is quiet. Unpredictable. Controlled. That's why it's intimidating. You can't control what you can't predict, and what you can't control, you fear. In this world, the most feared isn't the loudest talker. It's the one who commands the room in silence, not out of apathy, but from observing everything without reacting. That's the presence we'll cultivate today, not through cunning or words, but with 6 inner states drawn from ancient Stoic wisdom. Each one makes others question your next move. They won't know what you'll do next. They won't know who you are. That's what makes them wary. Let's begin. They expect a reaction, a flinch, or an outburst, but you choose silence instead. That's when the dynamic shifts. Most people react, it's instinct. When insulted, they defend. When threatened, they explain. When provoked, they erupt. But that's not strength. That's handing control to someone else. When your emotions are manipulated, they've already won by stealing your peace. When you argue or defend yourself, you let them into your mind. That's exactly what they want. Imagine this. You don't waver. You say nothing. You don't blink. You meet their gaze with calm. Un redouble poise. Suddenly, they're unsure what comes next. Suddenly, they feel exposed. That's what's truly unsettling. It's not noise, but silence. In silence, you force others to confront their own weaknesses. You hold up a mirror to their chaos. They want drama. You give them stillness. They want a spectacle. You offer emptiness, and emptiness never lies. Epictetus said, "What matters isn't what happens to you, but how you respond." When you respond with silence, with absolute disciplined focus, you're not weak. You're proving you've already won the battle within. I knew a man, quiet, unassuming, never raised his voice. In a meeting, a colleague tried to humiliate him, calling him outdated, mocking his ideas. He didn't argue or react. He simply looked at his critic and asked, "Are you finished?" Then returned to his work. The room went silent. The attacker shrank. That silence wasn't weakness. It was a statement. You can't shake me. You don't define me. That kind of response dismantles opponents more than any comeback could. The unshaken are untouchable. Those who don't need to prove themselves become a presence that commands awe. So, train your calm. Master the pause. Let the storm pass while you stand unmoved. In a world that feeds on reactions, refusing to react is your most formidable move. There's a presence that doesn't need permission. It doesn't chase attention. It doesn't rely on volume, charisma, or drama. It's simply calm, steady, unyielding. That's what makes it formidable, because most people are just noise, filling space with anxious energy. They talk too much, move too fast, try too hard. They crave attention like air, validation like water. They fight to control the room. Not realizing true power never begs for control. It claims space naturally, without asking, because it's rooted in quiet confidence. There's something unsettling about a man who doesn't flinch, doesn't explain, doesn't chase approval or force fake smiles. He stands alert yet silent, present yet untouchable. In that silence, the room shifts. People lower their voices near him, choose words carefully, glance at him before speaking, not because he demands it, but because his energy silently compels it. That's power, not the power that shouts or demands, but the kind that radiates from within, built on discipline, clarity, and restraint. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike your enemy." A man with unshakable presence doesn't just ignore his foes, he rises so far above them they can't reach him. That's why they fear him. I knew a man named Elias, unassuming, plainly dressed, rarely smiled. Yet when he entered a room, people noticed. Not because he tried, but because he didn't need to. He moved deliberately, spoke only when necessary, held eye contact just long enough to unsettle, every gesture and silence purposeful. Even when he said nothing, you felt something profound had been spoken. In a cutthroat industry ruled by egos, meetings were loud, with people arguing to prove their brilliance. Elias stayed silent, waiting until the noise exhausted itself, then asked one piercing question, often used a single, sharp sentence, and suddenly, the room snapped from chaos to clarity. It wasn't just his words, it was how he carried himself. No wasted motion, no unnecessary emotion. He was a reminder that in a world of reactions, silence is a threat. People feared his quiet because it was unpredictable, a sign he was watching, calculating, choosing his moment. The ones who fear you most aren't the loudest, they're the ones who can't predict your next move. That's the strength of an unshakable presence. It throws enemies off balance, forces manipulators to tread carefully, makes even the boldest voices soften in your silence. So how do you build it? Stop performing. Quit chasing attention. Breathe slower. Stand taller. Observe more than you speak. Practice doing nothing until your silence becomes the loudest sound in the room. A man anchored in purpose, clarity, and restraint doesn't rush. He makes the world slow down to meet him. When that happens, you don't need to claim power, you embody it. People insult you for a reason. Sometimes it's not hatred, but fear of what you represent. Your progress, your calm, your refusal to play their emotional games. So they attack, not with fists, but with words. Not to win, but to provoke. Insults aren't about truth, they're about control. They want to break your balance. Test if they can make you crumble. They want power by forcing your reaction. But when you respond, no matter how clever or justified, you give them what they want. Even if your retort is brilliant, even if your anger is righteous, if your peace is disrupted for a moment, they've won. But when you don't flinch, don't explain, don't even acknowledge the insult, it echoes louder in their mind than in yours. Silence in the face of attack isn't weakness, it's a verdict. A calm declaration that says, "You're not worth my response." Nothing stings more than being ignored by someone you're trying to wound. I knew a woman named Clara, working in a toxic office where gossip and subtle hostility were currency. A spiteful, envious colleague set out to undermine her. It started with subtle jabs, backhanded compliments, whispers just loud enough to hear, sarcasm disguised as humor in meetings. But Clara never took the bait. Not once. She offered a faint smile, took notes, focused on her work, and left the room as composed as when she entered. Over time, something shifted. The attacker grew louder, more vicious, desperate for a reaction. But the louder she got, the smaller she seemed, until one day people stopped laughing, stopped listening. When you keep swinging at an unyielding wall, you start to look foolish. Clara didn't fight back. She didn't expose her enemy. She stood so steady that her attacker collapsed under the weight of her own efforts. That's the Stoic lesson. Let fools reveal themselves. Let insults fall into your silence. Let attackers crumble under their own insecurities. Epictetus wrote, "If someone speaks ill of you, instead of defending yourself, say, clearly, they don't know me." In other words, don't give enemies the satisfaction of a response. Don't show them your anger or your clarity. Give them silence. Because the man who doesn't defend himself is either defeated or so elevated, the fight never reached him. Be the latter. Let your silence speak volumes. Let your dignity be unbreakable. The next time someone insults you, smile, not because it doesn't hurt, but because their words can't touch what matters most. People fear what they can't predict. They may not admit it. But when you become unreadable, you become a threat. Because control starts with information. Your fears, ambitions, habits, and weaknesses are leverage in the wrong hands. The more you talk, the more you explain, the more they learn not to understand you, but to map you, to manipulate you, to shake you. But when you stay reserved, act without warning, and explain nothing, you become a puzzle they can't solve, a question they can't answer, a storm they can't predict. That's what's terrifying. You don't need to lie or deceive. Just keep a distance between who you are and what others know. The Stoics understood this. They didn't live loudly or flaunt their desires. They acted with purpose, not for fame. They shared only what was necessary, because every revelation can be weaponized. Seneca wrote, "Knowing when to speak and when to stay silent is a great art. Sometimes silence isn't just wisdom, it's defense." I knew a man named Caleb, soft-spoken, disciplined, never oversharing. When asked personal questions, he'd smile, answer vaguely, and redirect. Not cold, just guarded. Some called him mysterious, others arrogant. But over time, those same people respected him. Why? Because they couldn't figure him out. They didn't know what angered him, what unsettled him, or what he truly wanted, so they couldn't use it against him. When pressure hit, when workplace drama flared, Caleb remained untouchable. No one could find his emotional triggers. Nobody saw his inner blueprint. He moved like a shadow, leaving others wary of his next step because they couldn't predict his potential. That's the power of being unreadable. Your enemies can't break what they can't touch, and they can't touch what they don't understand. Want to forge that armor? Stop broadcasting every move. Quit announcing every goal. Don't give people access to every corner of your mind. Let them guess. Let them wonder. Let them assume and be wrong. A man who keeps something to himself isn't hiding weakness, he's holding power. The world has no weapon against a man who walks in silence, wielding his truth like a blade, revealing it only when the moment demands. Let them study you. Let them try to crack your silence. Let them waste energy guessing your next move, finding no pattern but your own will. In a world obsessed with words, action becomes rare and fearsome. We live in an age where everyone announces their next step, their new project, their goals, habits, changes, and upgrades. They talk about what they'll do before doing it, mistaking attention for progress. But the more you talk, the more predictable you become. The more predictable, the easier you are to stop. Yet a man who acts in silence, builds without fanfare, plans without promises, he becomes unstoppable. By the time the world reacts, it's too late. The Stoics cared little for words. They didn't post daily affirmations or flaunt their virtues. They lived quietly, rigorously, with discipline. They knew silent action is the truest sign of self-respect. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. Let others talk. Let them sell dreams. Let them chase applause for ideas of success while you pursue the real thing." I knew a woman named Samira Sharp, driven, but so quiet she was nearly invisible. While colleagues bragged about new projects, future promotions, and side hustles, Samira stayed silent and worked hard. At first, no one noticed her. They thought she was meek, passive, forgettable, until her name came up as the one who built a system that saved the company millions. Suddenly, everyone turned to look. But by then, she was gone, promoted, transferred, elevated to a role they never saw coming because they were too busy talking. That's the power of silent action. It shifts the balance without warning. It delivers results without explanation. It leaves your enemies stunned, not because they didn't see you coming, but because they forgot to take you seriously until it was too late. To cultivate that power, shut the door. Work. Let your efforts echo in silence. Don't warn anyone. Don't predict your greatness. Don't overpromise. Just vanish into action and reappear with results. When you act without warning, you sidestep resistance and spark. Fear not of what you said you'd do, but of what you might do next. That silence, that tension, that mystery becomes louder than any words you could speak. In a world chasing likes, applause, and social approval, most people bend themselves to fit in. They soften their edges, mute their voice, shrink their truth to avoid conflict. They smile when they don't want to, nod when they disagree, all to be liked. That's why a man who refuses to bend, who walks in as himself, becomes a threat. Not because he's cruel or confrontational, but because he reminds others of what they've sacrificed. Authenticity unsettles, especially those who hide behind masks. When you stop trying to blend in, you don't just free yourself, you unsettle others. Not by attacking them, but by reflecting what they've long abandoned, the courage to live true. I knew a man named Jace, not loud, not rebellious, but he had a way of making people uneasy without trying. He spoke clearly, never softening his tone to please. He didn't chase trends, wore what he liked, said what he thought. When others gossiped, he stayed silent, not out of fear, but principle. Some avoided him, calling him harsh or arrogant, but deep down, they felt pressure not from him, but from their own inability to match his resolve. He was simply himself, unapologetic, steadfast. And that was more powerful than any rebellion. That's the paradox of authenticity. It doesn't shout, doesn't argue, it stands quietly and forces others to face their own facades. The Stoics believed in living true to your nature, not the world's expectations or the crowd's mood, only to virtue, integrity, harmony, even if it makes you stand apart. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Stop wasting time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." You don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to match the crowd's energy. You don't even need to be understood. Just be you. In a world built on performance, being yourself is intimidating. Want to be that force? Stop apologizing for who you are. Quit dulling your edges to be digestible to others. Stop hiding your sharpness, your pace, your clarity just to make others comfortable. Say less. Mean more. Say no when it's no. Walk away when it's over. Never apologize for the standards you hold. As long as you hold them for yourself first. When you become unyielding, unchanging for attention, and unmoved by applause, you don't just walk in peace, you walk with weight. The kind of silent weight that makes the insecure adjust their masks before you look their way. You don't fight your enemies. You become the man who unnerves them just by existing. No weakness, no drama, just silence honed by self-mastery. The most formidable man in the room isn't the loudest, but the one who doesn't need to speak. Don't shout. Don't explain. Don't rush to be seen. Let your silence speak. Let your boundaries resonate. Let your silence inflict the wound they didn't expect. And when they finally grasp who you are, you're already gone silent, focused, untouchable. If this stirs something deep within you, if you feel the shift toward that quiet strength, leave a comment. I'm done explaining. I just act and subscribe. Not because anyone demands it, but because you're tired of living small. Welcome to the world of silent power.